One night in the Bahamas, people were partying away, having a good night. Out of nowhere, a boat approached the shore and engaged a man at the party. The man on the boat says to the partygoer, "Did you hear about the plane I crashed?" The partygoer is very confused and asks, "Who are you?" The man on the boat replied, "I'm Colton Harris." Colton then asked the man to call the police. As the partygoer pulled out his phone to call the police, Colton said, "I'm gone. Read about me on the internet," and sped off on his boat. What a strange encounter. But Colton wasn't just an ordinary fellow on a boat. He was leading a manhunt and was about to meet his fate. Meet Colton Harris Moore. Colton led the police on one of the most infamous manhunts of all time. He stole cars, planes, boats in the process. He kept escaping police so easily he embarrassed many police forces in many different countries, including the USA, Canada, and the Bahamas. How this all started is very interesting, and we will get into this. Grab yourself a coffee or a mango juice and let's go. Colton was born in Mount Vernon, Washington on March 22nd, 1991. Colton's childhood was very rough. First of all, his dad wasn't in the picture, so he was raised by a single mother. His mother was an alcoholic, therefore she was never there for him. There was never any money around the house. Things didn't get better for Colton when he started school. All the kids knew Colton was poor by his clothes, therefore the kids picked on him and bullied him. One day a new kid enrolls at the school and stands up for Colton. This kid's name was Harley. You see, Harley saw himself in Colton. Harley also grew up poor, with a junkie as a mother. Despite Harley coming from a poor family, he had fresh sneakers, a laptop, and an iPod. And during the times back then, an iPod was a big item. You see, Harley was a thief. He would break into houses, stealing the goods. Therefore, even though he came from a poor family, he had all the newest gadgets. Harley took Colton under his wing and began bringing Colton along during his robberies. Harley also showed Colton how to pick locks, find hidden spare keys. He also taught Colton some basic info about robbing, like never rob a house if you know the homeowner, don't turn on any lights, if you get caught just run, and one last thing, never feel guilty, as the goods you are stealing will be reimbursed by the insurance companies. Over the next few weeks, Harley and Colton robbed dozens of houses. Colton did admit to feeling a bit guilty, however he was happy with the new money he had and all the new clothes. Luckily for Colton and Harley, they were very strategic. Where they're from in Washington, 1 in 3 homes were vacation homes, meaning people weren't living there half the year. This left many homes vulnerable to thieves like Colton. Even though things were looking a lot better for Colton, things were getting a lot worse back at home. His mother's alcohol addiction was getting much worse, and Colton couldn't help her. Colton would try to bring his mom to rehab, but she refused. His mom would beat him and even throw him out on the streets. Eventually, Colton was living in a tent in a forest and would survive by robbing houses. But it wasn't long before the police would get involved. There was talk around the town of houses being robbed consistently, and Colton took it a bit too far. Colton went as far as engaging in identity theft. This is when the police got involved. Eventually, Colton's mother's house was raided as they had a warrant out for Colton. Colton's mother was in disbelief as Colton was her son and Colton couldn't do no wrong in her eyes. Obviously, the police didn't find anything at the house besides empty bottles, as Colton didn't live there anymore and definitely wouldn't stash his goods at his mom's house. So the police decided they need to up their investigation. They got dogs involved to sniff out areas and parks. Eventually the dogs led them to a tent in the forest, and the police were convinced this was the end of the investigation. Police opened the tent and found multiple laptops, cash, credit cards, identification cards, and jewelry. Colton was really living like the Bilzerian in a tent. One thing they couldn't find though was Colton. Colton was actually nearby, hiding from the police in the same forest as he watched the whole thing go down. The next day there was a note from Colton on Colton's mother's door. The note basically said that the police were after him and he's gonna leave. The police started hiring professional manhunters to help them. They also made wanted posters and posted them everywhere. Colton was now officially a wanted man. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Colton was 16 years old during all of this. Everything I'm talking about right now, Colton was only 16. Anyway, Colton was way too smart to be hunted. He purchased lockpicks, night vision goggles, with all the stolen credit cards he had. He also stole multiple cars and boats to move around. Every time a car would run out of gas, he would just go steal a new one. He understood if he wanted to fill up a car with gas, he would be seen on security cameras and it would blow his cover, so he just kept stealing. When he saw an FBI helicopter patrolling the area looking for him, he would hide out in an empty house. There was multiple close calls when police would approach a house Colton was living in, and by the time the police got in the house, Colton would vanish out the back door. Even sometimes, homeowners would randomly come home and find Colton lounging on their couch, and boom, Colton would vanish out the back door. Every single day there was a news report about houses being broken into. Washington was in chaos because this kept occurring. But the police would never catch Colton. But Colton did something one day that helped the police track him. You see, Colton would get too comfortable and sometimes turn on lights in the house. Even though his friend Harley specifically told him never to turn on lights in the house, Colton would just do it. I don't know why. And this alerted neighbors, as they would know it's a vacation home and the homeowners weren't currently there. So neighbors would notify the police. One evening, police approached the house Colton was in quietly, and boom, they caught him and arrested him. But let me remind you, Colton was only 16, so he could only face minor charges. Colton ended up pleading guilty to 3 counts of burglary. He was sentenced to 3 years at a maximum security juvenile jail. Unfortunately, jail wasn't nice for Colton. He was still seen as the weird kid, and other inmates would slap at him, take his commissary money, and just give him a hard time. Anyway, this caused Colton to isolate himself, where he learned about planes and worked on his schoolwork. He learned from this, and now he wanted to attend college and lead a better life. After 10 months in the juvenile detention center, the police decided, since Colton seems like a reformed person with a bright future, they would transfer him to a group home where he would serve the rest of his sentence. Keep in mind, this group home had minimal security measures, as it's basically just a house. So Colton said, "Fuck it," and escaped from her window. The next morning, this was all over the news about the manhunt for Colton. Colton's mother even tried to tell him to turn himself in. Well, Colton thought long and hard about this, as he had the opportunity to turn his life around, and Colton decided, fuck it, and kept running. First thing Colton did was go find his friend Harley and ask him if he could stay with him. Well, Harley was in jail for robbing a safe from a church, so that wasn't an option. So Colton went back to what he knew best: breaking into homes, hiding in the forest, things of that nature. Well, one day there was a Mercedes-Benz speeding down the street at 100 miles an hour. So obviously police chased the car. The Mercedes lost control and crashed into a tree. When the police got to the vehicle, there was no driver. Colton jumped out of the car and vanished into the forest. When the police got into the Mercedes, they discovered all of Colton's goods: night vision goggles, stolen credit cards, and a digital camera. The police looked at the pictures on the camera, and the first picture was a big, beautiful selfie of Colton laying in the forest listening to music. Colton was basically mocking the police at this point. He was untouchable. During the following summer, the break-ins never stopped, and Colton had multiple encounters with people and homeowners, but Colton always got away. It was unheard of for someone to be a criminal like this and never be caught. But there was a few factors to take in. First of all, Colton lived off the grid, so there was no areas that Colton would frequent. Second, he was young, healthy, and sober. And lastly, he didn't own anything. He would just steal cars and abandon them. So the police had nothing unique to look out for. Eventually, the small town where Colton was from and was doing all these break-ins had enough. All the residents started buying guns and being on the lookout for Colton. But this didn't affect Colton. Colton wasn't going to be around much longer in the small town. One evening, Colton was hanging out at an air hangar, watching the planes take off. He started studying the patterns of the pilots, like when the pilots flew the planes, when they parked the planes, things of that nature. Eventually, Colton walked into a plane and just took off. Colton never flew a plane before, however, he played Flight Simulator, so that's how he learned. Colton was always strategic, so he only flew to certain heights to avoid all the air traffic control. Even though he was smart and strategic, flying is still very complicated. Colton realized the plane was losing gas very fast and he had to land. So he looked for the nearest patch of land and he landed it. Well, sort of. He crashed the plane in the process, but he came out unharmed. Anyway, Colton continued on his police chase. He then stole a police car, took the cell phone in the car, and took an assault rifle. So now the police were looking for a man who was dangerous and armed. Even though a lot of people were furious with Colton, Colton started to develop a fan base. Fans were excited that someone was sticking it to the man and living life on his own terms. In a way, Colton was like a hero to them. Someone even made merch of Colton and made a lot of money from the proceeds. Anyway, Colton kept going and stole a boat and went for a ride. After his boat ride, he went on and stole another plane and crash landed it again on Orcas Island. Then after this, Colton decided he had to get out of the USA. He stole another boat and headed towards Canada. In Canada, he went down and broke into a bunch of houses. Then shortly after, he stole a car and headed towards Creston, Canada. Then from there, he stole another car and drove back to the USA and went to Idaho. After that, Colton decided to go back home, so he stole another plane and crash landed it back in Washington. Yes, Colton really enjoyed crash landing these planes. When he was back in his hometown, he got right back to work. His hometown had dozens of reported break-ins. The police were coming down on Colton hard, but they could never catch him. At one point, he broke into a grocery store and drew feet on the ground with a message saying, "See ya." Colton knew he was leading this manhunt and he started mocking the police a lot more. At one point, Colton left a note at a vet clinic along with a stash of cash. The note said, "Use this money to take care of the animals." Isn't that amazing? Someone so reckless still has a huge heart for animals. Anyway, eventually Colton stole another boat and headed towards Oregon. Eventually, Colton called an attorney to discuss turning himself in. An anonymous attorney called Colton back saying if he turned himself in, they would give him $50,000 and represent him in court for free. But Colton had 5 days to turn himself in. Colton said, "How about no?" and didn't take the offer. Anyway, Colton steals another car and goes for a bit of a road trip. He drives to South Dakota, then starts scoping out the houses for a place to crash. He noticed one of the houses didn't have any cars in the driveway, and he also noticed that no one was home for days. So Colton used it as a new crash pad. However, one night Colton got too comfortable. One night he puts all his clothes in the wash and goes to take a shower. Then boom, a car drives into the garage. The homeowner had returned after a long vacation. Colton being in the shower at this point, he didn't hear anything. The homeowner thinks it's weird that the TV is on and some clothes are in the washer. The homeowner approached the bathroom and sees a light on. Then boom, the door slams shut. The homeowner bangs on the door and Colton comes out naked running. The homeowner tells him to get out of the house, but Colton runs to the basement. Colton then grabs a gun and points it at the homeowner. The homeowner runs out of the basement and locks the door and drives off to the neighbor's house to call the police. Colton also freaked out as he was locked in the basement and his clothes are in the dryer. So he's just in the basement naked with a gun at this point. Police show up and go into the house, but guess what? Colton was nowhere to be found. He broke out the basement window, went over to the neighbor's house, and took their car and took off. Wow, this guy really couldn't be stopped, eh? Anyways, the police went on and had a meeting with every single plane owner to inform them to lock their planes and hide the keys. Well, Colton was still one step ahead of them. He found out which plane owners weren't met with police yet and took advantage of the plane owners that didn't lock their planes. Well, on 4th of July, he scoped out a plane that wasn't locked and he took off. He was aiming for Cuba, as Cuba has a law that if a fugitive is arrested, he can't be extradited. Therefore, Colton knew if he got caught up, his consequences would be delayed. Or at least he wouldn't be punished in the USA. Anyways, Colton was running out of gas. He was approaching the Bermuda Triangle and ended up crash landing on one of the islands. Not only did he destroy the plane, but he set off an emergency transmitter which notified the US Coast Guard that there was a crash on the islands. Well, the Coast Guard immediately knew, yep, that was Colton, and started searching for him. The Bahamas was perfect for Colton. Not only was it July 4th weekend where a lot of people were out partying, but there was many vacation homes Colton could easily break into. But the US police were coming down hard on Colton. First off, they locked down all the airports on the island, and they also put posters everywhere saying if you see Colton, turn him in. One bar owner saw the poster of Colton and he was shocked as he realized he recently gave Colton a beer. Anyway, one night a bunch of folks were partying and Colton drives up on his boat and asked the partygoers if they heard about the plane he crashed. The partygoers didn't know who he was or what he was talking about. Eventually someone recognized him from the wanted posters. Colton told them to call the police because he was bored and wanted to be chased, then drove his boat off. Colton ended up at another island where he got off his boat and went for a walk. But there was a security guard that recognized Colton and started chasing him. Colton gave chase, then turned around and pointed his pistol at the security guard. The security guard left Colton alone after that, but he did end up calling the police. So the police went searching for him along with the military. Anyway, at 3:30 a.m., there was a police officer looking for Colton on a boat. But he had to use the bathroom, so he docked his boat and went to the bathroom. Colton noticed the boat with the keys in the ignition and took the boat. Dozens of police boats saw the incident and started chasing him. However, Colton's boat was much more powerful and he could outrun the other boats. So Colton drove off smiling, watching the other police fail to catch him. But as Colton was smiling, he missed a major key. His boat's GPS informed him of an oncoming sandbar, but Colton didn't see it. When Colton ended up on top of the sandbar, he was stuck. The manhunt was over and Colton put a gun to his head. The police told him to put the gun down, but Colton shot a warning shot at them. The police unloaded bullets at Colton's boat to scare him and eventually gave Colton a chance to give in. He put his hands up. At this point, the USA wanted Colton, Canada wanted Colton, but he was arrested in the Bahamas, so they decided what they wanted to do with him. Funny enough, Colton was only charged with one thing, and that was not presenting his passport when he entered the Bahamas. However, eventually, he was shipped back to America, and he faced 67 felonies that were caused in 3 different countries. He was looking up to 40 years in prison. However, Colton hired a beast of an attorney, the same dude that defended Ted Bundy. The law found Colton was responsible for $1.4 million in all the planes, boats, and cars he crashed on his adventures. Well, you see, Colton had one asset that could potentially pay for all of this. He had an amazing story that would shock the world. So he came to a deal with the law where he sold the rights for people to use his life story for the movie, but there was one catch. The catch was, after all the damages were paid, Colton would never see a penny from any money from the movie. Some people say this is harsh, but the law wanted to make an example out of him. Colton's attorneys argued that Colton was never given a fair chance at life because he was raised by a single mother who was an alcoholic. They also argued because of his mother's alcoholism, Colton was probably brain damaged, and at birth he was dealt a bad hand. The attorney also argued the only reason Colton turned to stealing is because his mother didn't have food for him, so he had to steal just to eat. Anyway, Colton ended up getting 6 years in prison, along with the deal that the movie that's going to be made about him will pay for his damages. Anyways, as of now, Colton's 33 years old. There isn't much known about him other than a few pictures online and a Twitter account that's not confirmed if it belongs to him or not. There has been rumors that Colt lives off the grid, not stealing of course, but just living far from civilization. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a nice day.